Those of you outside, we are going to go ahead and get started. And you are welcome to come and join us anytime that the Spirit moves you. So I'm going to, just so I know, how much time do we usually take for this section of the 11:45? Okay, great. I think that'll work really, really well. So just sort of tell you a little bit about the journey after St. Mark's, when I left you all and you were engaged in the process that led to Pastor Karen's arrival, I went on to serve as the interim pastor at St. Matthew Lutheran Church in Walnut Creek, and I spent a couple of years with them. The process was a little bit more elongated there because they had issued a call to someone who accepted, and the Monday of the week that was to lead up to my farewell Sunday, after the contract had been signed and everything was done, this individual informed them that there was a change of mind and heart, and they were not coming. So that led to an additional round of getting names and doing that work. So I stayed with them for a longer period of time, 2 years, 4 months, and 7 days, but who was counting? And then I went on from there to a congregation called Emmanuel Lutheran Church in Los Altos, California, in the Silicon Valley. And that was a first-time experience for me to be in that part of the world and see all the dynamics. And of course, that one I started during the pandemic. So I met with this congregation for worship online for a complete year before I actually had a Sunday service. And so we had this interesting dynamic where we had actually started the work of the interim. We had gotten to know each other very well, and we were progressing in many ways, but still a year in, the first Sunday, I felt like a newcomer because it was the first time that we were together in the sanctuary. When I finished that ministry, I did the same thing that I have done for all of my interims, and that is enter into a moment of discernment and ask, what comes next, God? Where are you leading me? Do I still have gas in the tank for another one? When I finished at Los Altos, the answer was no. I don't have the energy that I once had to sustain full-time ministry, and I felt a need to shift gears. I didn't know it at the time, but I was already sick. I had cancer, and it wasn't to be diagnosed for another year or so. So it was an interesting journey. Well, actually, a couple of years, but that was a factor in that was unbeknownst to me at the time. So what I did was I actually retired. I'm on the retired roster now, not on the active clergy roster. So bishops can't bother me, and I was feeling like I didn't have the energy and the capacity to do full-time work, but I still wanted to have something to do. Still felt like there was ministry for me to be engaged in, and so I started to pray about that. And lo and behold, Rustin Comer, who is the lead pastor at St. Matthew, and I started a conversation about what would it be like to come back to St. Matthew on a part-time basis, working under contract and not under call, and help them to establish a ministry for those of us who are 60 and older. And that's how this whole journey of returning to St. Matthew, but 3 years ago now, started. So it's been a wonderful time. I work with a young, energetic, dynamic, creative, and hilarious staff. It's a large ministry staff. It's a multi-generational congregation, one of the largest congregations in the Synod. There's a lot of ministry activity across the generations, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a bit. And I take great delight in being the old timer on the team, but not having to sit in the big chair anymore. So that's really, really been great. So we're going to talk about ministry that engages people in the third of life. That's really what we're up to in the particular area of ministry that I focus on at St. Matthew. And just to give you a sense of why we talk about third. Uh, I included something that was very helpful to me early on in my exploration of this work that I found from a woman named Betty Till. Betty, who I spoke with early on, w- had been an executive coach, and she mostly worked with people in the healthcare field. You know, these really high powered individuals who were doing brain surgeries and all these kinds of life saving things. I mean, really intense, wonderful people whose identity was so much wrapped into their work that when they thought about retirement, it was terrifying because they were asking the question, what kind of purposefulness can I have if not, this thing that I'm doing? And so she decided that she needed to open up a whole new branch of coaching in order to coach people, these high powered execs, into retirement. And so that's what she continues to do. Uh, but she gives a very helpful sort of synopsis of the way that many people do a breakdown of life into three thirds. So the first third of life is up into our 30s, and it's all about figuring out who we are. Whenever I do this initial part, we there's a lot of head nodding because we all know it's true, right? It takes us a while to figure out who we are, what our gifts are, to start to gain some sense of purpose and passion for life, all those kinds of things. So that first third is that piece. The second phase between our 30s and our 60s, it's we are building something, right? We are now building families and careers, and we're focused on as Father Richard Rohr talks about, building the container of our lives. So we're earning a living, paying mortgages, raising families, a lot of energy and struggle, that goes into that middle phase of life. Then we hit the 60s. And again, we're talking in generalities. And again, these are not um, definitions to live and die by, but helpful guides along the way. In the 60s, things start to shift. As Betty says, we're neither young nor old, but it's a time to sort of start asking questions. Many of us in our 60s are still working, but we're starting to ask questions about what comes next. What's the purpose of everything that we've earned and we've worked for? And it becomes a time for reflection and some introspection and really grappling with the question of purpose in that next season of our life. Now, the third of life is not a monolith, as you well understand, right? As we live through it, you start in your 60s, and then you move, and life goes on and changes, and so things change along the way. One of the unique features of the third of life is that, God willing, we move out of the first third into the second, out of the second third into the third. We know that there is a termination point at the end of the third of the journey. And that really forms part of the work of the spirituality in this season of life, is making peace with what comes next. And how do we do that? And how do we continue to find meaning and purpose and create better narratives for aging, uh, other than, sort of there's this sort of cultural uh, narrative around us of, decline, decrepitude, and disease, right? There's more than that, right? Certainly more than that. So, how did we start this ministry at St. Matthew? Interestingly, it started, some of the seeds for it were laid when I was there as the interim in terms of listening. Because what we heard at St. Matthew has been a congregation that has successfully um, continued to engage younger generations of people. And so it is a very robust, large congregation with ministry for families and children and teens and all kinds of stuff that is going on. And it's continued to really lean into being that. But when I got there, I was also hearing from people in the third of life that they were sometimes being made to feel that their heart language of worship, in terms of maybe a more traditional style, being shaped and formed by the traditional hymnody and liturgy of the church, was unwelcome or in the way. And yet at the same time, they understood the vision. They were wholeheartedly supporting the vision to move into the future and to try things that are new and creative and innovative. And in fact, they were the ones that were paying for it. but they were getting kind of a message, a subtle message along the way sometimes that they were not being fully included in that. Pastor Rustin, when he came, he did the same thing that I did. He embarked on a tour of listening and heard very much the same thing. So this was stirring in his heart and mind when he engaged me in conversation about what it might look like to come back and start doing this ministry. So that was part of the work, a deep season of listening, hearing from one another within the congregation. But we didn't stop there. As soon as I started, there were folks at St. Matthew that were expecting that there would be this big flurry of activity when I came back and we started doing things. But the first piece that we put into place was we do a traditional worship service on Wednesday mornings at 11 o'clock. And we put this traditional service in. We have a lovely pipe organ there. And so we have a phenomenal accompanist who plays organ and piano. We do liturgy and hymns. And we do that service at 11 o'clock, and it's followed by a lunch every week. And so we put that worship piece in place, and then we embarked on a season of further listening, this time to the community. What's going on in the community around us? Who's engaged in this space? Who's serving people in their senior years around us? What are they learning and discovering? What can they teach us? What can they show us? Because we were new entering the space. I had just sort of stumbled into my 60s at this point, and when I started this work, the first thing I realized is, okay, I'm here, but I have absolutely no expertise in terms of what's going on in terms of the world around us and the services that are out there. And that was a fascinating period of time, just absolutely fascinating. I interviewed all kinds of people from different organizations and businesses and institutions, and it was just fascinating to find out the depth and the variety of services that exist in the community. And I would ask a series of questions, and I always ended with the last question. The same question was the last one, and that is, what is it that breaks your heart? And to a person in their own sphere, wherever that happened to be, the answer had to do to some degree with loneliness and isolation. And so that became a real point of learning. One of the big discoveries is a big concern about loneliness and isolation. Another discovery is this is not a space where we need to reinvent the wheel. There are agencies and organizations out there. There are governmental agencies. There are nonprofits. There are for-profit businesses. There are people who are doing work to help people thrive in the third of life. And it is staggering, the amount of them, so staggering that often it's hard to figure out who they are and how to access what it is that they provide. But the people are out there. So we were very clear, okay, we have a role to play in all of this, but it's not to reinvent the wheel. We don't have to do something that somebody else is already doing better than we probably ever could. So we there were many helpful things that we learned in that season of listening. The other thing that we were doing is that we were engaging in the biblical narrative and saying, what does Scripture have to teach us? And I included just one reference that I really love from Psalm 92 that I asterisked there. And at the end of your document, do you have the handout or just me? Just me. Okay, so yeah, we'll send out a handout. But here was what Psalm 92 verses 12 through 14 says. The righteous flourish like the palm tree and grow like a cedar in Lebanon. They are planted in the house of the Lord. They flourish in the courts of our God. In old age, they still produce fruit. They are always green and full of sap. Sappy Christians, isn't that a great metaphor? You all sappy Christians. So, I mean, it's really interesting because, in the narrative of Scripture, older folks were called upon to take great leaps of faith and do quite heroic things. Think Abraham and Sarah, Elizabeth and Zechariah. So, they're significantly woven through the journey is the inclusion of the beloved elder saints in the life of faith. So that was our listening. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we did a lot of listening to people who have been doing work in this space for a long time and finding out who these organizations are. There are some core principles that we've built the ministry around. One of them is for the entire congregation at every age and at every stage of life to live deeply formed lives. With Rustin's leadership, the focus of the ministry there has really been to help us go deeper into our life of faith, to fall more in love with Jesus. And virtually every aspect of ministry has been reinvented in a way that seeks to help us pursue that, to go deeper into our life of faith and our relationship with Christ. The other thing that we realized early on starting this work is that most ELCA congregations, if you look at the demographics, are doing third gen ministry by default, right? Our idea was one of our core principles was intentionality, not by default, but by design. What would it look like if, in the midst of the other ministries that we have at St. Matthew, we also had a ministry that was quite intentionally accompanying people through the third of life, connecting with the larger network of service providers around us, and advocating for better narratives around aging? What would that look like if we did that with intentionality? And so that's been a really key piece, and something that I think all of our congregations can, at some level, benefit from in terms of just thinking about how do we do this in a way that has intentionality. And then the third sort of core principle out of others that exist around St. Matthew is Rustin has always encouraged us to dream God-sized dreams. When we are thinking about what we want ministry to be, let's not do what's comfortable and safe. Let's dream God-sized dreams and really venture out into places that are unknown to us. Learn the things that we need to learn. Make the discoveries that we need to make. Change ourselves as is needed so that we can really embrace something that God is doing. So all of that kind of dreaming and framing of the ministry led us on this journey of developing the third gen ministry at St. Matthew. And we call it third gen kind of playfully because, just to kind of have some fun with it. We're in the third of life, so we call it third gen. Some people love that, some people not so much. That's not the important thing. The important thing is, what is the substance? So lo and behold, this little sort of part-time ministry project that I took on with great delight at St. Matthew started to become something really significant. Around the same time that I was doing the early stages of this ministry, St. Matthew was leaning very deeply into a strategic planning process and really trying to dream those God-sized dreams about the future. And this little retirement project of mine started to become a significant part of the strategic plan for the future of the ministry of the congregation, which is both a delight and somewhat terrifying. But out of it, in our strategic plan that we are really working on now, we're really into the second year of a 3-year plan. One of the components of it is to do what we call power positive aging. And so third gen ministry, really, that's the piece of it that we own. And within that, there are 3 strategic priorities that we are embracing. The first is connection and community. And as I said before, when I asked people what breaks their heart, loneliness and isolation. And more than that, Harvard University has done this longitudinal study. It's the longest study of human development that's ever been conducted. And when they got to the point where they were looking at people who were aging, and they were trying to find out what are the greatest determinants of well-being in our latter years, the biggest positive variable was the quality of their relationships. We are social creatures. We had one of our lunch and learns, which I'll talk about in a moment, we had a speaker come in who is a neuro psychologist, neurobiologist, and he's teaching us about the brain. And his way of saying it from his field was, our brains need other brains, right? We're wired for community and connection. And we in the Christian faith have understood that community and connection are significantly important. And the quality of our life as we age is often largely determined by the quality of those ongoing relational connections. So, connection and community became one of the pillars, one of the central components of what we do. So, how do we get at that? We have our Wednesday worship service as one piece. And this is not, let me back up real quickly and say, we are not only addressing this for people in the third of life through our third gen ministry. There are lots of other ways that St. Matthew is hitting this. We have a robust small group ministry. There's lots of other kinds of ways in which people are shaped and formed into community and into relationships. But we do some of that as well. The Wednesday worshiping community is just one piece of that. And again, as important as the worship service itself is that we have lunch afterwards. People stay, they linger, they visit, they build relationships. We have a set of people who worship there on Wednesdays who also worship on Sundays. The majority of those folks probably do. Then there are some people that worship pretty exclusively on Sunday morning or on Wednesday morning, I should say. And then we have a stream of visitors. We have people all the time who are finding out about the service and coming and visiting, both from within our community and other congregations around us. And so it's kind of a nice, interesting variety. And then we have some folks that just occasionally want to dip their toe in the liturgical water, and so they come and pass through, and that's all good. But it's about building community. We do social events and activities of a variety of different kinds of events. And these are usually, events that will have between 50 and 100 people at them, depending on what it is. And they're not just for fun, although we always have a lot of fun, but they are also for helping us build relationships and build community. And there are some folks who only engage community at these events. Others, lots of folks in our third gen community don't come because they have other networks and points of connection. That's perfectly fine. But for some, this is really the only place where they are continuing to have those meaningful connections and build those relationships. So that becomes really, really important. We established and I'll talk about strategic partnerships a little bit more in a minute, but we have a partner that from the community that we have been working with, and she and I do a monthly event that we call a lunch and learn. And for the lunch and learns, we bring in a speaker who talks about some aspect of aging. And it has really wonderfully run the gamut from, how to put your affairs in order to things that what are the options for senior living as you age, and what do you need to pay attention to? Just all of that. I've done a presentation there a couple of times on spirituality and the third of life. What's that look like and feel like? What's different about it? What do we need to pay attention to? Those kinds of things. So the way this works is the first Tuesday of every month we have this lunch and learn at 11:30. We have lunch together. Um, then the speaker does their presentation, and there's time for conversation. And it's really a beautiful thing because all those other senior serving organizations that I talked about out there, this partner of mine is really been connected into that hub for a long time. So Andriana goes out and she says, "Hey, would you like to sponsor the lunch at our next lunch and learn? And we'll give you 5 minutes of microphone time, talk about your organization and what you do." And then they provide the lunch for us. So it really is a beautiful way to make that happen. And we've been doing these for a couple of years. We're on our second year of doing them, and the attendance has grown, and the ratio of members of St. Matthew to members of the community has changed. At the beginning, it was 70-30 St. Matthew folks to community folks. But since we've done some other things out in the community now, it's probably more 50-50. And we like that. That's part of our intentionality. Is we're not concerned just about what's happening within our congregation, but how we are doing this ministry in partnership and engaged with the community. Another, and that's what gets me into the next piece. So connection and community is one of the priorities. The second one is to be a hub and an ally to other senior serving organizations in the community. How are we able to gather people together in ways that help to enhance their work, which ultimately better enables us to serve the people in this season of life? We have a couple of really key strategic partnerships. One of them is with this person I mentioned a moment ago. Her name is Andriana Mendez. I went to my first senior resource fair at the Civic Center in Pleasant Hill, California, one of our adjacent communities. And I was chatting with a man named Art Lottie, and Art has a moving business that specializes in helping seniors transition and downsize. Even if it's staying in place, how do you downsize, right size? They call it right size because downsize has a negative connotation, but how do you right size your living space, right, for where you are now? And that may be staying in your own home and just really sort of moving through some of the stuff that you've accumulated. Newsflash, your kids don't want it. Get rid of it now. So they have this company that specializes in this, and then also transitioning into retirement communities and things like that. And when I was telling Art about what we were trying to do at St. Matthew, he said, "You need to meet my wife." Lo and behold, he introduces me to his wife. Her name is Andriana Mendez. She is the co-owner of this business, but she also formed a passion project called Sensational Seniors Workshops. And she has had a passion for helping people thrive in the third of life because she has a mom in that space and she's also raising a kid. So she's part of the sandwich generation and really started to develop an interest in doing this work. So Andriana and I connected and we started doing these lunch and learn events together. And and that's just been an incredible blessing. And she has become one of our first key strategic partners. I looked around and found that there were a couple of networks. In the western part of Contra Costa County, there's a network. We don't really engage western Contra Costa County where we are in Walnut Creek. But in the eastern part of the county, they also have a network. And we do have people that come to St. Matthew from the eastern part of the county. And so this was one of the first networks that I engaged with. And as I was doing this discovery work and this relationship building work, I realized that there's no network in central Contra Costa County. Interesting. So we'll come back to that in a minute. But finding these partners out there, you know, that are doing various things that really closely align with your values and how you can engage with them. There's another organization called Behavioral Fitness that is um, it's really kind of a holistic thing. Dr. Allison Mayo is the lead of this organization, and she and Terry de la Montaña developed this organization. And what they do is they do behavioral health stuff, counseling, support, all kinds of wonderful things. But they also do some physical health stuff and kind of work at the intersection of well being. And we had been, evaluating where we'd gone so far at St. Matthew, and we did a lot of stuff in terms of education. We did a lot of stuff in terms of spirituality, and but we were thinking we could use some. I mean, there's a piece that we haven't really hit that has to do with some physical. Like how about classes about balance and all those kind of critical things that help us to be well and not fall and stay healthy. And again, this was not a place where we needed to reinvent the wheel. We just need to find the right partner. Now we found at Behavioral Fitness, they have chair yoga and they have balance classes and they have all kinds of wonderful things. So we've engaged with them. And one of our staff members who um, is a certified spiritual director has been pulled in to lead a small group, a support group there, actually for young adults. And it's lovely and wonderful. So finding those partners out there that really align with you is huge. I mentioned earlier that um, we were looking around and we were saying, well, isn't it interesting that There's no network in central Contra Costa County. And started asking questions about why that was. Never really got satisfactory answers. I think that a lot of it has to do with the fact that the central part of Contra Costa County, Walnut Creek, Arinda, Lafayette, Moraga, are incredibly well resourced communities. The outlying areas on the west side, you have Richmond. On the east side, you have, Brentwood and Pittsburgh and Antioch. Those folks have worked together because they need to work together to really maximize and leverage all the resources that are out there. I think that there's been a sense in central Contra Costa County where, yeah, we've got the bucks. We don't need each other so much, but I really think we do. I think we are better when we understand who's around us, and so that if somebody walks through the door and says, Pastor Tim, I need help with this particular thing, it may not be something that we at St. Matthew are going to provide, but I should know what direction to point them, who to call, in order to help them find what they need. There was a middle-aged man in the congregation that I knew from my previous time there. He came and said, Tim, my folks, I've been caring for my folks. They're both having issues with dementia. I can no longer care for them. I need some kind of placement. And I knew immediately, because we'd put in this time and this work and built these relationships, I knew immediately who to call. And I connected him with someone who does placement. And the way that works is it's a free service to the family. He has individually and personally vetted every place that he would send your loved ones, and he receives his compensation from them when placements are made. So he's been inside the facilities, he knows the owners, he knows what's going on. We were able to make a placement. It was perfect. And what a relief for this man to know that his parents are well cared for and well loved at this time of need in their life. So that kind of networking is hugely important. One of the God-sized dreams that emerged from the first couple of years of this work and my great partnership with Andriana is, what if we created a Central County network? What if we built it ourselves? And Andriana is also a great dreamer and a great partner, and she has an incredible resource list. And so we invited people to meet for an initial gathering, networking, a face-to-face networking event, to see and to really ask the question without preloading the answer: is there a need for this kind of networking in our area? And we invited senior serving organizations, businesses, and agencies. And at the first event, we had 120 organizations represented. And we had conversation around the table. And of course, I gave a little, spiritual thing at the beginning, because that's my gift. That's what we bring. And it was powerful. And we asked them, and we got an answer. Yes, we would love to do this. And so we have one of these now every quarter, the Central Contra Costa County Senior Care Senior Resource Network, and we meet at St. Matthew because we have the facility to do it. Again, we have. You notice that food runs through. You get tell us some more than one thing's changed since I've been here, but really, because something happens over a meal that doesn't happen in any other context. And Jesus knew this, right, about relationships and how we connect. So like with our lunch and learns, with our network gatherings, we have one of the community members who will sponsor the lunch. And usually it's, grab and go sandwiches. The last one we did, though, somebody had a taco truck come all the way from Stockton or something like that. And the meal was far more popular than anything in the conversation because it was incredible. But we gather, we put people at the table. There's always an opportunity for conversation and learning. People can bring materials. And so people are getting to know each other, getting to know what resources they provide, and strengthening our collective ability to serve people. So again, if somebody walks in the door and says, this is what I need, they might say, well, we don't provide that service, but we know exactly who does. And here's how to make that connection. So we are now the co-sponsor with Andriana of this network. and we're really finding it to be incredibly beneficial. That then led to the next thing, which was, okay, let's have a senior resource fair, because there are senior resource fairs all around Contra Costa County. Yeah, there's sort of a season for them. It's like a baseball season. There's sort of a season for them. And they usually start in the springtime. And I don't know what's going on in Solano, but I would guess that many of the senior centers and organizations are doing something like that. And that's all part of the discovery for you. But, they were kind of sprinkled around us, but nothing, again, nothing in Walnut Creek, nothing in Central County. The other thing is St. Matthew, as I mentioned, is a pretty large congregation. It has a really big campus. And so we can accommodate more. Many of these resource fairs will have, 40, 50, 60 organizations present, which is wonderful and huge. We did ours, again, we had 120 organizations there. We had two facilities going. We had the large hallway outside of the sanctuary, our fellowship hall, and then what we call our teen center, but it was very much like a multi-purpose space like you have next door. We had about 800 people came through. Um, it was a rainy day in the morning. It was raining in the morning when the vendors were loading stuff in. They were pulling their stuff in the rain, but displays were set up, and it was really incredible. The magnitude of it was phenomenal. And the whole point is we're all learning about all these great resources, and that's wonderful. And it's good that we know each other, but ultimately, the people who would be served by these things need to know about them. And so people could come and they could get face to face, and they could um, find out, what's out there. And it's stunning. Like, what happens when you have someone that you're caring for at home who has dementia and can't go to the dentist but needs their teeth cleaned? There are people that come to your home and do that. Did I know that? I did not. There are people who help you write love letters to your family to leave behind, so that when you're gone, they have this lasting and beautiful legacy of a letter where you tell them what they've meant to you and what your shared life has been. Absolutely spectacular. There are people who, like I said, will help you when it comes time to find placement. Um, there are people who have support animals who will help you with various. You just the level of services is really heartwarming. And I will say that most of the people, 99% of the people that I've met who are in this space, are incredibly passionate about it. Really, they feel it a calling, even if it's a for-profit business. They feel that it's more of a calling than it is just a job. They really, really deeply care. Um, so the last piece of our ministry, in terms of the priorities, the connection, community, hub, and ally. The last piece is advocacy. Part of what we learned very quickly is that the experience of aging varies dramatically by how well resourced an individual is. If you have a lot of money and you want to go into a retirement facility, you can go to places that are essentially like a cruise ship on land. There's a place in our community that's fairly new that some of the folks at St. Matthew live in called Viamonte. It's a lovely, lovely retirement community, just maybe a quarter mile away from us, really super close. Um, and it costs about $500,000 to buy in, and then you pay, your monthly fee. Your heirs can recoup about 2/3 of that initial buy-in that you pay. So it's not like it just goes away, but it's glorious. I mean, they've got artwork everywhere. They've got a lovely dining room. There's a coffee bar, and all kinds of services and transportation, all kinds of stuff. And then from there, there's a whole other range of services. A lot of people want to age in place. They want to stay in their home. And how, what kind of support services do you need? So there's a variety of medical and non-medical services that you can engage. But a lot of that may depend on your resources. And so that becomes an issue, right, in terms of making sure that we've got uh, adequate resources and agencies and organizations. And many of the agencies and organizations that exist, especially the nonprofits, are trying to fill that space. there's a legal, I can't remember the exact title of it, but it's basically Contra Costa Legal Services that serves seniors, where you can have a will done or a living trust, so you can get legal services for free, because there are people out there who need it and who really need to know that there is somebody who can come alongside them for that. So advocacy is sort of an inherent part of the work, advocating for people that are poor and need help. The other part of the advocacy piece is the whole issue of better narratives for aging. We just need to have better narratives about the aging process. One of our partners that we stumble onto is at Fuller Seminary in Pasadena, is an organization called the Max Dupree Center, and the Dupree Center has a whole focus on thriving in the third of life. In fact, they've created a class. It's a video-based small group or large group class called Thriving in the Third of Life, and have used that as one of our tools and resources. And again, part of what that does is there's an educational component in there that is saying we need to advocate for better narratives for aging. When I talk about with our third gen ministry folks at St. Matthew, I say, I part of me wants to start developing T-shirts that I can sell. Like when we have a service day. We had this cleanup day before our fall kickoff last year, and it was a big call for volunteers. And who came out? It was the third gen folks, right? We had to be out there during the day, and everybody else is working and raising kids and doing their thing. And so the third gen people, and that gave rise to my first idea for a T-shirt, and it was third gen ministry. We get shit done. Look around. I mean, who's doing the stuff, right? And so again, there's tremendous capacity there. Often resources that accompany that, a lifetime of experience to contribute, wisdom that we've gained along the way. It's incredible. The other T-shirt, by the way, around our social events, we have the best time when we do these social events, and usually we're still all home and in bed by 8 o'clock. So the second one is we party like rock stars and are still in bed at 8 o'clock. So, but they're again. I mean, one of the first discoveries is wow. As we move in now with the lifespan, elongating, we're coming into the third season of life with tremendous capacity that needs to be celebrated and valued by our society and by our churches, and really celebrated and lifted up, and not be told you're in the way, because we've got a lot that we want to contribute. The other piece, terms there, and so there are lots of other ways in which advocacy happens. I'll tell you one more, and then to just kind of wrap up. Um, there is at the state level a California Master Plan for Aging. It's a framework. So it gives a framework with priorities for how to address aging in the state of California, which tells you that it's sort of big and large and also unfunded, a framework. Where it gets legs is at the county level. And so Contra Costa County has developed a local playbook for the master plan for aging, and it gets at how we serve the people in need and how we care for people, especially the most vulnerable in our community. I keep hearing that parable from today echoing in my head, right? Who are the people that we need to notice and cross the road to help out? And when they were developing this plan, local playbook, they were interviewing people that they identified as key stakeholders, and lo and behold, they identified me as one of those key stakeholders, and they engaged me in a conversation about the priorities that they were setting forth, which are really fine. My critique was they're not talking about spirituality. They're talking about mental and emotional health, which is good, and physical health, which is good. The idea was well-being reimagined. And I said, if you're going to be imaginative, then you've got to include a conversation about spirituality. And I'm not talking about a sectarian worldview. I'm saying that if you don't talk about spirituality, you are ignoring a fundamental piece of what it means to be a human being, right? We all are trying to find meaning, and spirituality has to do with how we find and make meaning in our life. So But so we've been engaged at that level too, and there have been times when, from that work, um, when budgets are coming around and funding is up for grabs, we've done some direct advocacy with our local lawmakers and with our city government to make sure that the resources are getting where they need to go to help people with the greatest needs. So that's a way, another way in which advocacy has come into the picture. Okay, I'm going to stop and see if there are any questions or anything specific more that you would like me to elaborate on. As you can see, it's been a fascinating and wonderful ministry to be a part of. Um, and I'm just, right now, I feel like I'm just sort of holding on to the tail of it because it's really taken off.
I got a question.
Fire away.
When you were beginning the ministry, did you have a discussion on scope, on the scope of what your ministry would be? Because I got tired listening to
Yeah.
everything you all do, and it seems like a big elephant that you're trying to tackle, and I'm just wondering how you reined yourself in.
Well, that's a very good question, and I would say, you know, in terms of scope, it's a constant conversation. You know, we're trying to chase a God-sized dream. So this thing has gotten big, and part of what I'm being challenged to do now is a lot of what we do at St. Matthew really is centered around me and my leadership. Social stuff, we've got folks that are doing a lot of that, but especially with regard to the community engagement and the bigger picture stuff and the advocacy work, I'm doing a lot of that. And Rustin is really challenging me to say we need to expand the ownership of this because, you know, it can't continue to grow and it can't um, continue without you there to do it. So that's a place of challenge. And yeah, right now, to be honest, keeping it, I'm doing this, you know, on 20 hours a week. So, but I will say the strategic partners are key in that because you can really expand the scope if you have people from the community who are in this space that you have put in the time and the energy and built the relationships with that you can do these things with. But it is, I mean, it's pretty wild because, you know, people come in, like, for example, the ministry fair. One of the toughest nuts to crack was the engagement with the city, to really get the city to know us and know what we're doing and to see how it engages with the work that they're doing around the senior center and things like that. But when they finally came to the resource fair, they said, wow, we just don't know of another congregation that's doing this work with this kind of intentionality. But community partners are key in that. You can't go this, you shouldn't go this alone.
So I was wondering, um, say you're a 40-ish person, age person, and might possibly move to a different state or have parents in another state. Are there similar programs available?
Yes, I will say yes. Anywhere you go, you're going to find that there are people that are working diligently to support us as we age. So, and what I've found, because this is a very relevant question, because one of our families is getting ready to transition into retirement living, but they're not going to do it in this state. They're going to move to another state. And so the question that they posed, and they came to one of our workshops on, you know, senior living options to say, can you connect me with somebody? Do you know people who know people?
Right.
And sure enough, the presenter said, sure, I know people up in Washington State who are doing this work and can, you know, connect you. So yes, the services are available. The trick is always, it's hard to find. I mean, if you just do a Google search, you're just going to be overwhelmed. It's kind of overwhelming. So my best advice is, you know, find a local agency of some sort and sit down with them and start asking all your questions and see where they will lead you to make the right connection.
Can you be cloned?
Uh, uh,
I wanted to thank you for what you presented to us. It is absolutely wonderful that what you were able to accomplish in Contra Costa County. Solano County has always been considered a backwater county. And so I'm not sure how together they are in as what you described in Contra Costa County. And I'm not being derisive.
no.
It's just the reality.
And that will be part of, if this is a kind of a ministry direction that you all choose, to take, that you feel God is calling you in this direction, that will be part of your discovery. Like,
And
what's out there, who's out there, what's the sense of how well they play together in the sandbox. There's a lot to learn.
And I just wondered, I know that you had indicated you're going to have some handouts, but I just wondered if you have a cheat sheet, if you will, of how you got the ball rolling and how you reached out and what are the do's and the don'ts, those kinds of things. Again, we don't need to reinvent the wheel, but it would be helpful to have a leg up as to how to proceed if that's the direction the congregation and the church council decide to do.
Yeah.
And again, thank you for your
Sure.
gifts.
Yeah, I had, I would meet people and they would tell me what they do, and then I'd say, who else do I need to talk to? And they would connect me to 3 other people, and then I'd meet those, and it just kind of, it was fascinating how it kept going. But there were some really key people at the beginning who saw me on the first network Zoom and said, because I said, I'm new to this space, and 2 or 3 people right away reached out and said, come here, Sonny boy, let me take you under my wing. And they did, and they were wonderful.
Karen just said we're a backwater county. I came to this county 55 years ago. I was 22. I didn't know too much about this county at all. We'd seen a cousin off at Travis Air Force Base when I was a child. That's exactly what I knew about Solano County. And I came over and I told my folks that I drove 50 miles over rolling hills to get to Fairfield,
Yeah.
which was not true at all. There were about 10 really, but it seemed like 50 to me when I got here. But over the years, many coalitions have been built in this community, and they have been countywide based on a situation like anemia, where this county was 58 out of 58 counties to have the highest incidence of anemia involved. We've had local ones in this congregation, and we've had local ones in this city and the larger community. So I think there are people in this congregation that have some of that experience, and it's a matter of saying, do we want to do it, to listen as you suggest, to come from a new perspective, and then engage in it or not, to build that. But it just, as you said, God-sized ideas and God-sized missions, sometimes it happens. It's not going to be a replica. It will not be a clone of St. Matthew's, but it might be something suitable to this space.
Has to be contextual. And I
Yes.
think to Stu's point, we're dreaming a big dream, but we really realized quickly that our sphere of influence was not the entire county. And it would be way too broad for us. I mean, some of the partners that we engage with serve, like the county area agency on aging, they do the whole county, right? So they've got their finger in everything because they're a county organization. But for our work, we really needed to say, and we did this for the larger framework of our strategic plan, really, who are the communities that we're serving? Because it's going to be different, and you can get too far flung. We have some engagement with East County because we have people that live out there, but the folks that are on the ground doing that work really should be rooted in that community and not in Central County, because it's a different place. And so, kind of finding the scope that's right at some point becomes important. Otherwise, it becomes too. Yes, yeah, that's part of the discovery that you'll make as you go. Well, thank you. It's been wonderful to be with you. And if you have further questions or want to know more about, what we're doing or consultation down the road, just holler. Yep. Thank you.